One of the things that I'm so interested in is getting a wide perspective of people who have different backgrounds and entered into the industry, to communications and advertising. Actually, we're talking to some publishing people too. And what I'm curious about is what really inspired you to get into this industry?
So, I think at our time, I'm not sure that I had a clear vision that I was going to go into advertising.
Mm-hmm. What was the spark that made you think that this was the kind of industry that you wanted to work in?
I feel like I'm going to disappoint people by saying I had absolutely no intention or understanding of the advertising space before I actually ended up in it.
Did you study advertising to get the job, or marketing to get the kind of job that you have today?
The way I would answer that question is yes and no. So let me start with the no. So I'll start with the no. I have a degree in international studies focusing on sociology, anthropology, and Spanish. And so that's the clear answer for no. And I'd like to be able to tell a story that was all by design, the study of behavior and human behavior and people in groups and history, and in many ways storytelling, that was a path that led me to this place. That would not be true.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I have found that having a liberal arts degree and a love of learning and intellectual curiosity, and also an understanding of sociology and some of that impact has definitely made me a better marketer over time. But it wasn't necessarily a planned and or designed connection.
In college, when everybody else was doing lifeguarding or construction and whatnot, those were things I wasn't able to do. And that wasn't at the time when internships, when that was the thing you had to do. Right? My father knew somebody in the ad world, and it said, well, you're very ADD and we need to get your energy out somehow, but you're also incredibly creative, so why don't you go try and do this art direction thing? For me, it was something that I was able to do, right, without physicality, but rather I was able to use a laptop, obviously, and use a computer, and so that was kind of the perfect fit for me. Mm-hmm. Until we realized that I'm partially colorblind. And so being an art director as a partially colorblind person doesn't work out too well. So I learned that after two internships.
I was a psych major and I studied a little bit of art history. I thought the combination of kind of an appreciation for the arts and trying to understand how people's brains work to change their minds about things or generate opinions about things would be an interesting mix, and that's what got me interested in advertising.
Being a history major, I fell in love with storytelling, and I love history as a reference for the future. I think about the coursework that I had in college in the liberal arts field, and I think that really set me up well for a career in content that I happened to stumble into.
Have you found that that study has kind of carried through now years and years later?
I think that the art history always keeps me interested in kind of what's current and new, and I like to do that. But to me, the biggest thing that I learned in college and in my life was how to problem solve.
Because I got into advertising pure sort of happenstance. I called up somebody who was an alum at the school I went to. Hey, what are you doing? I moved to New York. We had lunch, and he said, you should give this a shot. But the reason I stayed, and what I love about this industry, is the fact that you use your left brain and your right brain, right? And that is absolutely fascinating to me. I love problem solving, and I always tell my kids, in some ways, they say, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm in the crisis management business. Advertising is like a daily crisis, and there's something really invigorating about being able to come in, have a crisis, use creativity and sort of your business sense to be able to solve it. And there's very few industries that allow you to do both.
Some of the people that I talk to have no previous experience with advertising or marketing before they go in. They go to school, they study geology, and then they land in advertising.
Right.
But you actually do have experience, right? You did journalism.
Right.
Did you do that purposely because you knew you wanted to be in advertising, or did you think you wanted to be a journalist?
My dad was a pretty prominent creative director in the advertising world in the 70s and 80s. And I think through osmosis, I learned a lot about advertising that was really attractive, and I knew that I wanted to end up in advertising. But I went to a school that didn't offer an advertising program, and so I fell into journalism. And what I loved about journalism was that it's all about finding the story.
Right.
It's all about finding something interesting and compelling that a reader or a viewer would want to pay attention to. And I think there's a lot of that experience that helped me get off to a fast start in advertising when I made the switch, because I had not a cynical eye, but I didn't take everything at face value. As a journalist, you're charged with looking under the hood and around the corner. And I think that the best ideas and the best advertising is just like that. It's not presenting a product or a service at face value. It's an interesting angle and a compelling way of telling that story. So it was a pretty natural switch, and I'm so glad I did it.
So you can't really study advertising, right? And like take courses that interest you, because the most important thing in advertising is to be an interesting person. Things could be architecture, and you go, what does that have to do with advertising? Actually, there's creativity mixed with sort of analytical, engineering.
And functionality,
And
right?
that has a lot to do with advertising.
I don't think that just because you studied one particular thing means that's what you are. That's what has defined you. When I first started my career, people were, they were any kind of majors, art history majors, and they were running, multiple brands. And so it didn't seem to have affected them in their careers. It's great. It's a great place to start.
Right.
But you don't have to have a marketing undergrad or grad degree to be a marketeer.
Where's that place where you lose time? Where, you sit down to do something and you look up and 5 hours have gone by and you're like, oh my gosh, I felt like 5 minutes. And if you find that, try to figure out how to get paid to do that. I got pretty close with advertising because it is creative. It's if you had to do drama as a business, I think on the creative side, I work with actors, I work with musicians. You have to write plays in your mind, so I can find those moments of joy where I lose time.
I really had no idea what I was going to do at all when I graduated from college. I took the first job I could find in New York City, which was an administrative assistant at a new magazine called Elle Decor, right out of school, and I absolutely fell in love with the publishing business through that first opportunity.
I started off as like the bathroom break girl for receptionists. I was like, all right, how can I stand out? Just answering the phones, it was funny because I was like, all right, I can't believe I have a degree in journalism and I'm answering phones, part-time basically. But I was like, if that's my job, I'm going to do it the best way I can. And so I learned each department floor, like what the personality was, and I would change up how I'd answer the phone depending on which place you were calling in. So if you was the global executive floor, I was very much like, BBDO, how can I direct your call? And then if it was the creative floor, it's like, yo, BBDO, what's going on? Who you want to talk to? Try to look like you care.
The more open you are to understanding them all, instead of like, I need to work for this company or I need to be on this side, I think like letting a little bit of experience, just get as much exposure to a variety of problem solving and let that guide some of the experience that you decide then to maybe go to a college for advertising or not.
And that helps with networking.
Fortunately, I didn't know enough about advertising, so I went in through the creative side. I actually then wanted to see what the other side was about, so my next adventure was into the account side. I went into the account side and I got fired because it wasn't how I thought. And somebody handed me the book Truth, Lies, and Advertising by John Steele. And at page 43, I put it down and I applied to Miami Ad School. And that's when I became a planner.
I love team sport. I've always played competitive sport all my life. And if there's one industry that's a team sport, it's advertising.
It sure is.